This is a map of the 2020 election in the US. It is an election that, if you did not know very much about it, you would think that the candidate receiving the red votes won. The candidate in this election that got the red votes was Donald Trump. The candidate getting the blue votes was Joe Biden. This is what's called a choropleth map. The way it works is you take a country, you chop it up into administrative units. These can be states or counties or precincts. And then you assign color to each one of those administrative units on the basis of how much of the vote each candidate got. Pretty simple, right? If Donald Trump got 100% of the vote, the pixels in here would be 100% red for that county. If Joe Biden got 100% of the vote, the county would be 100% blue. Now, this is by far the most common way of communicating election results. And 2024 is an election year, not just in the US, but also in the UK. So we're about to see a hell of a lot of these. There's just one problem with this type of election map, which is that it's not only incorrect, it's actively misleading. Again, if you didn't know who won this election, you would probably surmise that Donald Trump won. In fact, this was a key piece of evidence that Donald Trump and his supporters used to claim that the election was stolen from them. They said, look at this map, look at how red it is. How is it possible that we didn't win? In the next 10 or so minutes, I'm going to delve into the problem with this type of election map and show you how we can arrive at a solution using street lamps and an aging US weather satellite. So I've zoomed into the state of Oregon in the Pacific Northwest. If you look up in that corner in the Northwest, there's a blue splotch. That blue splotch is Portland. It's the largest city in the state. It's home to around 600,000 people. It voted mostly for, in this case, Hillary Clinton. This is data from the 2016 election. Now, down here, I've outlined in black Harney County, Oregon. At 26,000 square kilometers, this county is roughly the size of Belgium. Now, I'm going to pause, and I promise this is related, as it's a Friday night. How many of you are going to Coco later? Or how many of you know what Coco is? Coco is a club. Oh, we got a hand. We got one, at least one person going to Coco later. Coco is a club in Camden. It's like 10 minutes away from here. It has a maximum capacity of 1,500 people. The amount of votes that were cast in Harney County, Oregon were 1,600 in the 2016 election. And yet the amount of space that Harney County takes up on this map is several times the size of the entire city of Portland, right? The 1,600 people that voted here, 1,400 of them voted for Donald Trump, right? So this county is going to be really red. That red is multiplied across an area the size of Belgium, but with a population the size of Coco on a Friday night. You sort of see why this might be a problem if the only tool that this map has to communicate the election result to us is the color that it displays. Now, if we try to think of a solution to this problem, you might think, well, counties are pretty big, right? Harney County is pretty large. What if we chop up the counties into precincts? What if we use smaller administrative units? Smaller units should be more precise, right? The interesting part about this problem is that it actually gets worse the smaller the administrative units you use. It gets worse the more precise the data that you use is. And that's because the densely populated counties tend to be smaller, and the sparsely populated counties tend to be a lot bigger, right? Why would you subdivide Harney County? Why would you cut it into two counties of 700 people? Just keep it as one of 1,400, right? But as we move from counties to precincts, as we get smaller administrative units, you can actually see Portland shrinking. The extent of the visual bias in these maps cannot be corrected by using smaller administrative units, by using more precise data. This is a fundamental problem with this sort of map, which is that it colors pixels based on land area, not on the number of votes. But of course, land doesn't vote, people do. If we look at a histogram of the pixel colors in this map in Oregon, we can see that the distribution of pixel colors is heavily skewed to the red side, right? So we can see over here on the left, very few pixels that are purely blue, and we can see on the right, lots of pixels that are purely red. In fact, we can actually see Harney County itself in this one bar. Now, again, these maps have as their only tool to communicate information to us the color of the pixels. If they did their job perfectly, the average pixel color in a state should be the exact average of the vote in that state. So in other words, Donald Trump in 2016 got 44% of the vote in Oregon. The average pixel color in Oregon should therefore be 44% red, right? Well, the average pixel color in Oregon for that map is 76% red. So it's almost doubling the extent of his lead. And that's through that mechanism of having large, sparsely populated counties take up more space on the map than smaller, densely populated counties. So how do we go about fixing this if we can't use smaller administrative units? I was thinking about this problem as I was flying back into the US during the last election, and I was looking at a site that many of you have also probably seen. I was flying at night, so I saw the city of Boston, which is where I was flying into. My parents don't live in Boston, they live in a small town just north of Boston. And as I was flying into Boston, I saw something sort of like this. Obviously not this, because this is from the International Space Station and I was not flying that high. But I saw a bunch of lights speckled throughout a vast sort of dark landscape. And I saw the city of Boston as a large shimmering city, and I saw the town that my parents live in as a small dot in a big black forest. And then I thought about what the election map would look like if we were to overlay it on the site that I was looking at. That dark forest that my parents live in would be a sea of blue, because we're in Massachusetts, but you get the point. The entirety of the forest would receive the color of the votes from that tiny dot of light that is the town that my parents are from. So I got the idea to merge the election data with nighttime lights data. Since the distribution of light pollution across the world pretty closely mirrors population density, we can actually use it as a proxy for population density, why not, to filter out the areas that are unpopulated. If the fundamental problem with these election maps is that they overstate the vote shares of underpopulated areas, what if we just got rid of those areas on the basis that they're dark at night? So this is a nighttime lights image of Dallas, Texas. It's taken by an old US weather satellite called VIIRS. That stands for a Visible Infrared Imaging Radiometer Suite. Rolls off the tongue. An old US weather satellite that takes pictures of the Earth at night. Quite pretty pictures at that. And when we look at Dallas, Texas, we can see obviously the city itself. And then as we move outwards, we see darkness, right? These are fields, maybe some desert. And in those fields and desert, we see little pockets of light, human settlements. When we look at precinct level voting data for the corresponding area, we can see the outline of Dallas, Texas here again in blue, but it is sort of adrift in a sea of red, right? But as we know from that previous image, most of that area is empty. So what I thought to do was just clip out the dark areas and keep the color of the areas that are bright at night to mirror the distribution of the population. So if we cycle through these images, you should get a sense for what's going on here, right? We move from a nighttime lights image to the precinct level vote share data to a filtered vote share map. And what this does is it retains the spatial information of where the voters are located, right? But it gets rid of the areas that are unpopulated. And this significantly reduces the visual bias in these maps. Now, if we zoom back out to Oregon and we apply this process, we can see up here that Portland stays bright, right? The city of Portland, we can actually see its precise outline now. And if we look at Harney County, we can see just a few settlements dotted in this massive area the size of Belgium. We've taken the problem of coloring this empty space red and introducing visual bias, and we've reduced it drastically. We can do the same thing for, actually, if we plot out the histogram of pixel color again, it looks a lot better, right? That 44% vote share is this black line. The dotted line now shows the average pixel color. The average vote share is 44%. Now the average pixel color after filtering is 47%. So we went from being off by 30% to now only being off by 3%. Not perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better. This is that same process applied to the state of Nevada. It's a key battleground state. It also happens to be largely desert. And when you filter Nevada on the basis of nighttime luminosity, you can see the two battlegrounds in Nevada, which are Reno and Las Vegas. Now, when we zoom out and we apply this to the entirety of the US, something really interesting happens, right? This bit right here in the middle, the heartland, that was the basis of the claims that Donald Trump and his supporters were making that the election was stolen from them, vanishes when we filter based on population density, based on light pollution. But not only does that heartland vanish, a new battleground appears, a phenomenon of cities characterized by blue centers and red rings appears. Now, it's important to remember that when Donald Trump won, the prevailing narrative for the reason for his victory was that rural working class white voters staged effectively a political rebellion against the elites in our country, and that it was rural voters that brought Donald Trump to victory, and that the story of the 2016 election was a conflict between urban elites and rural voters. But when we filter the data based on nighttime lights, and we look specifically at cities, most of the cities look the same. They have a blue core and a red ring. And this much more accurately reflects the actual battlegrounds that took place in the 2016 and the 2020 elections. Donald Trump was carried to victory in 2016 not by rural, white, working class voters. As we saw in that previous map, there simply aren't enough of them to lead to a comprehensive election victory. He won on the backs of more affluent suburban voters. And in fact, one of the key reasons for Joe Biden's victory in 2020 was a switch by suburban white women to Joe Biden from Donald Trump. So we are able to understand political dynamics in the US much better once we adjust for population density in this way without losing the spatial information of where those votes were cast. And if we zoom out and apply this to the entirety of the US, not only does it look very pretty, but it highlights that story. And as we head into a year of 2 elections, not just in the US, but in the UK, and as we are about to be bombarded with very, very bad choropleth election maps, I hope you remember this exercise, and that land doesn't vote, and that people do. Thank you.